Welcome to another edition of Under the Microscope. I'm Michael Young. Thanks very much for joining me. In studio with me today is the head of NICIL, Mr. Winston Brassington, and we're going to have a very focused discussion today. We're going to discuss several topical issues with respect to NICIL, its operations. Of course, we're going to get to the bottom of the matter to find out exactly how much money NICIL has, what that money is going to be used for, or why the funds are at that level. We're also going to speak with Mr. Brassington about several other issues related to how NICIL does its business, what is its record with respect to transparency and accountability. Thank you very much for joining me in studio. When I called you for the interview, you readily agreed so that we can have this discussion today. Now, Mr. Brassington, tell us a little bit about NICIL. I don't think persons understand essentially what NICIL is, what it's about, or what is its purpose, or how it came into being.
Okay. Thank you for having me.
You're very much welcome.
NICIL was formed in July 1990. It was set up by the PNC government with the purpose of being a government holding company for investments. Essentially, in simple terms, it can basically hold the shares, hold the assets, invest in companies, sell companies, anything that you would think a company can do, NICIL has the authority to do. And this was set up back in 1990. I became head of NICIL in 2002. I became head of privatization in 1996. So I've been doing my job now for over 17 years. Okay. NICIL is basically the company that owns most of the state sector, most of the industrial estates. And it operates like any ordinary company. It has revenues, it has expenses. The profit that it makes, some of it is distributed to the government as dividends, some of it is retained for working capital, some of it is invested. And because it's such a big group, when you look at NICIL, what you're looking at is, on the one hand, a company called NICIL, but as a group, a set of subsidiaries that includes companies like Guy Oil, National Shipping, NCN, National Newspapers. So NICIL accounts reflect all of the transactions of every single member of its group.
All right. Now, thank you very much for sharing that with us with respect to NICIL's operations. Now, tell us about the company's current financial state. Before we get even further to audited accounts and all of the other burning issues, tell us, as is, what is NICIL's current financial status?
As of the end of March, NICIL has a little over 700 million in its bank accounts. This is March of this year. This is for NICIL as a company alone. It doesn't include the position of any of its subsidiaries.
All right.
Any one of its subsidiaries from time to time may have cash. For example, Guy Oil has to keep a fair level of cash because it has to have enough working capital to buy fuel, depending on, so okay. Companies like Guy Oil have to have a fair bit of cash.
All right. Now, there's this concern from the opposition benches that there's not been audited accounts in NICIL for some time, consolidated audited accounts, I think, altogether. Explain to us what is the procedure with respect to dealing with audited accounts, because for many persons, the issue of transparency and accountability is very important, and people treat it as the hallmark for saying whether or not there is corruption, is not corruption, or something to hide, so to speak. But what is the status? Why haven't the accounts come to the National Assembly in the way that they should have over the last couple of years?
Okay. NICIL produces its accounts and submits it to the Auditor General for audit. As a general practice, NICIL has been timely in preparing its accounts and submitting it to the Auditor General within 4 months of the end of each financial year. As we speak right now, the Auditor General has already completed the audit of NICIL up to the end of 2010. They've indicated they're going to start 2011 next week. But the group accounts have only been submitted to Parliament up to 2005, or 2004. 2005 will just recently completed and will be laid in Parliament shortly. And the reason that the Auditor General hasn't issued a consolidated opinion for the NICIL group is because some of the subsidiary audits have not yet been completed. And he awaits that before he issues the entire group accounts.
All right.
But he's promised us, he's working that by the end of June, the consolidated audit for NICIL up to the end of 2010 should be ready.
All right. Now, thank you very much for that comment. Let's talk a little bit about accountability and transparency. Now, NICIL's operations as of recent, since the Donald Ramjattan administration, and even before then, has taken office, has come under heavy scrutiny from members of the opposition and some independent commentators who seem to say that the monies that NICIL generates, before I believe they were banking on a figure of about $50 billion or $55 billion. It's clear now that that money does not exist. But they have been saying that the monies and the revenue generated by NICIL should be paid directly into the consolidated fund. I think that was the subject of heated parliamentary debates. It's the topical issue, one of the issues that is being discussed across the board by these commentators. Why is that not the best scenario at this time, and why is it not rational, as the finance minister seems to be explaining, because NICIL operates under the Companies Act? Why is it not rational for all of NICIL's money to be brought into the public coffers in that way?
If you take what they're saying to its logical extension, you would dissolve every company and everything would operate out of the consolidated fund. So when you sell, if Kaieteur sells fuel, you wouldn't need Kaieteur anymore because they'll operate like a department of the consolidated fund. That's what the logical extension is. Each company has a commercial set of operations and objectives. It collects revenue, it has to pay expenses. Only at the end of the year do they fully determine how much profit they've made. From the profit, they may declare a portion of that as dividends. If you just started putting all of the money into the consolidated fund, it would be highly inefficient. It would be too bureaucratic, and it would basically create a situation where you don't have the autonomy that companies need to operate efficiently and effectively. This is the way it's done throughout the world. You have state-owned enterprises. They operate as separate legal entities. What we're doing here is no different. If they suggest that you put all the money in the consolidated fund, they're basically suggesting that you dissolve every company and just have them operations conducted out of the consolidated fund, which is ludicrous.
Okay, but do you believe that these experts in the field, that they are aware of this argument, and they are aware too of the situation with respect to the operations of NICIL, and probably there may be something more that is being hinted at here as they continue to play out this game of politics or rationale in the National Assembly, if you want to call it that?
I believe that they should know how these things work. I believe that they're also being intellectually dishonest. I think this is political games, political theater, to score on cheap political mileage. They are making what they ought to know are deeply irresponsible statements. They're not coming forward and backing it up. They're not coming forward and backing it up. And then they're just throwing that out there and creating an impression. And they are, I'm very upset at this sort of behavior, because it is going to hurt anyone who wants to do business with government when you have members of parliament in the opposition who seem bent on making statements that are dishonest or irresponsible.
Now, there's been lots of talk about private deals, secret deals, things that are happening that are undermining the public interest, so to speak. favoritism. I can go on by describing it through several different words, different themes, if you want to call it that. Now, is this business about secret deals, you understand, a facade, or is it something that is actually was existent and now government is trying to clean its act up and is now putting laws in place to ensure that there's transparency? Are there any secret deals or projects, you call it agreements if you will, that NICIL has negotiated behind closed doors that the public has not been properly informed about to date?
There are no secret deals. NICIL has conducted its operations in a transparent manner. That being said, you do not go out and reveal the details of what you're doing until there's certainty and agreement on what's being done.
Okay.
That's a cardinal principle of doing business. The principles of transparency that we adhere to is that if we have something to sell or we're looking to buy something, we will advertise it. It will go through a tender, a process. Our privatization program is conducted in accordance with a privatization policy paper that came out in July 1993. Every transaction that we do goes through the privatization board, which is a stakeholder board that includes representation from the private sector, labor, consumers. So we don't have secret deals. We follow certain cardinal principles on transparency.
Well, you might say there are no secret deals. Let me close it up for you. There's some talks that there's favoritism and that the persons who benefit from some of these, the largest of these deals, are persons who are closely either related to government, pro-government, friends of government, and so whatever the transaction is comes into, dispute, especially in the political arena. Now, is that the case? I know for one period of time, and we can address that here, persons were talking about the Sonata Textiles deal and the fact that the person who would have, benefited from that deal got tax holidays and concessions and all of these things that they should not have gotten. I don't know whether or not that's true. You're here, you're head of both, you were head of both NICIL and the privatization unit. You should be able to tell us, let's use that deal as an example. Was there anything, corrupt, secret, that lacked transparency about that deal? And then probably you can, allude to some of the others that have wreaked controversy in the public.
All right, well, let's start with Sonata. And let me say that we fully ventilated this matter in 2008. Mm-hmm. In fact, coming out of this, we had a workshop at the Pegasus, and we published a bit of a book, basically showing every single privatization, the transparency in it, the stages that it went through from the privatization unit to the board to cabinet. And where we hadn't awarded something based on a tender, we showed the justification. In the case of Sonata, has basically been in a dilapidated state for many years. The Chinese handed it back and left because they couldn't make it work. We advertised it twice, public advertisement. We got no takers. It was costing us to continue to hold it. The vandals were breaking in and stealing everything. We were paying huge costs for rates and taxes, for security. It had become a haven for criminals to go. Even the security guards were afraid. There were gunshots and, with people who were trying to steal. And so we were actively looking to try to find someone who can beneficially use the property. When Queen's Atlantic, we approached a number of people, and Queen's Atlantic was interested in doing it. Now, we looked at the complex from a privatization perspective to achieve a couple of objectives. Whilst money was one, what was more important was the development trust of what could be done with the property. And so the deal that was worked out was that there would be a lease and that there would be a substantial level of investment in a number of businesses.
Okay.
And that investment would exceed $20 million US. Of course, you would see major rehabilitation. You would see significant employment. You'd see basically a conversion of what was a loss-making property to something that was no longer loss-making for us. We'd be collecting lease fees. And we said that if you made the investment, you would have an option to buy it based on independent valuations. And that is what we had here. And at every stage of the game, all of this was approved by the privatization board. So, you know, there's a lot of people who seem to ignore that we've spoken about these issues in the public a while ago. And they keep referring to it because they perceive friendship. Well, the fact is no one else was ever willing to put that offer on the table. And if they were, let them come and show us. Now, we do many transactions. You know, some people you may know, some people you don't know. I don't hear Mr. Ramjattan complaining that we sold stock feeds to Mr. Badal, or we sold Guyana stores to Mr. Yassin, and that Mr. Glenlal is the director of Guyana stores, and they owe us money. You know, I don't hear them complaining about these things. So we treat fairly and impartially with friend, foe, family, whoever it is. I know a lot of people, and I could say I have a lot of people that know me. But when it comes to getting the business of government done, not only myself, I'm very tough in the negotiations. But not just that. We have oversight processes. We have a board. We have cabinet.
Okay.
So whatever we do, there are layers of processes that helps to ensure there's transparency.
No, thank you very much. I saw you getting a little,
Well, it keeps coming up, and it's like amnesia. A lot of people forget that we have ventilated these matters in great detail in the past.
Now, given the fact you've spoken about those things, so this leasing of state lands and the other operation that NICIL does, there seems to be a clout now over the integrity of NICIL as an entity now, more than ever, minus the fact that you've just quite eloquently explained to us what the processes are. What is responsible? Because even the information that you've just shared with me is public knowledge. So what is responsible now for this clout still remaining with respect to whether or not NICIL is going to negotiate fairly, whether or not they're negotiating for next to nothing, whether or not NICIL is being run as though it is a department of the People's Progressive Party Civic, if you want to go so far? What is responsible for this clout, and how can we remove it now so that NICIL can continue to function and we can get ahead with our business?
Okay. First of all, let's look at NICIL and what we do. As I said, most of the NICIL owns a lot of assets, and virtually all of the assets that we have, they privatize in accordance with our privatization policy.
Okay.
So you have a set of principles for transparency that's set out there. Now, on the other hand, you have the accountability issue. Now, NICIL has been proactive in seeking to have the accounts audited. But we don't appoint the auditors. We don't do the audit. No, the law of the country states that the Auditor General is the auditor of all state-owned entities. So we have no choice in picking the auditors. What we have to do, which we do, is submit in a timely manner our accounts to be audited. And I've explained the delay. What we've additionally done, because of the time it's taking to get the consolidated audits completed, is the following. We published in 2008 a booklet on all of the privatization transactions from a transparency perspective. We're actually bringing that up to date, and we'll be issuing very shortly a more detailed revised booklet up to the end of 2011. We'll have all the money matters mentioned in more detail in that booklet. As the audits of our subsidiaries are completed, we have caused these accounts or annual reports to be tabled in Parliament. Within the last 2 years, the Minister of Finance has tabled in excess of 80 sets of accounts or annual reports related to NICIL subsidiaries. So we have sought to do all that we can within our control to be as open and transparent. I believe the controversy over NICIL has to do with the fact that NICIL is going to be part of the public-private partnership for the Marriott Hotel project. And because Mr. Ramjattan received strong support from Mr. Badal, who owns the Pegasus, and we know that Mr. Badal doesn't want the Marriott to be built. The private sector commission has come out in support of the Marriott. Many hoteliers have come out, but Mr. Badal is opposed to the Marriott. And because Mr. Ramjattan is a close friend of Mr. Badal and probably received substantial financial support, they're trying to remove the autonomy that NICIL has always had, which was set up from 1990 by the PNC, to say, bring it to Parliament, so they can cut funds and cut this as they deem. You know, they cut the LCDS, 18 billion. That money is supposed to go to the hydro. So they would like to have the ability to say, we don't want to do this, cut it. You know, the government, the elected government, has made decisions and announced a long time ago that the government will be investing 1/3 in the Marriott. This is a public-private partnership. We have had the Burbage Bridge, which is a public-private partnership. A lot of what we do, without taking money from the Treasury, we've taken NICIL, which in the 1990s or in the 1980s, when you look at those companies, all of them were going to the Treasury to get money. We've turned that group around. You know, we've restructured, we've privatized. What we have doesn't require any funds from the Treasury, except in 2 instances, NCN for government services, and in the case of electricity subsidies for customers. But apart from that, NICIL and its group are entirely self-financed. Plus, we've paid in the last 10 years over 9 billion in dividends to the Treasury. So it's not that we're keeping all of our monies. We do what we do in a transparent manner. We pay over substantial sums as dividends, and we invest some of it, not a lot of it. The Marriott is the single largest investment we will ever undertake.
Well, I don't know that, you know, some of the comments you would have made in retrospect with respect to Mr. Badal and whether or not he wants the Marriott or whether or not he's
a public
friend
record.
of Ramjattan. You know.
And he's a public, it's stated publicly that he supports the AFC.
Well, I may recall that fact, but for the purpose of our show, we'll treat that at this time as some sort of allegation that we obviously cannot prove.
Well, maybe Mr. Ramjattan, since he's been making so many allegations, can come out and state whether they receive financial support from Mr. Badal or any of his companies.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Brassington. Now, moving forward, let us talk quickly about the way forward. First of all, are you prepared at this point in time? I know you have made several presentations to the opposition with respect to various projects. Are you prepared to engage in a constructive public manner any individual, any company that would like to have information either about the projects that, as you said, you've published a book, but probably presentations or one-on-one with respect to the projects that have been undertaken, NICIL's operations, or would you urge anyone that has information which would so prove in public domain that NICIL is corrupt, lack transparency, and has been doing underhand deals to come forward?
Oh, definitely. They're free to do that. They can do that at any time. They don't have to come to me. There are many other bodies. If the politicians have this, let them come forward and present it. Let them come forward and present it. I've done my job the last 17 years with honesty and integrity. Let them prove otherwise. Everything that we've done can stand scrutiny. I don't report to Mr. Ramjattan. I don't report to Mr. Greenwich. I report to boards. I report to cabinet. There is a process that we follow. I don't make decisions on my own. Right? So I can stand up and say, I've done my job with honesty